This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
History is not the same as the past. We can never directly experience the past. We can never know how it felt to be a gladiator fighting in the Colosseum of ancient Rome, or exactly what Napoleon had in mind when he decided to invade Russia in 1812. What actually happened in the past is gone. History is our attempt to reconstruct the past from the evidence that remains. The word history, while commonly taken to mean everything that has happened up until now, has its root in the Greek word historiein, meaning to find out by inquiry. The same root gives us the word story. We could say, then, that history is our inquiry into the story of the human race. History and fact. History is something very distinct from facts. Historians ask not only what happened, but also why did it happen, how did it happen, and what were the consequences, and use the answers to forge the links in chains of events, creating a continuous narrative. These are the kinds of inquiries that historians make, and from their conclusions, the past, for most of us, becomes a much more comprehensible place. Even today, however, there are cultures that do not concern themselves with recording history in the conventional sense, that is, as a chronological narrative that aims to represent what actually happened in the past. Many indigenous peoples, especially those with a strong oral tradition, instead weave together events of the distant and recent past, and both mythological and actual happenings. The result is a body of knowledge that is relevant to that culture, which is passed down through the generations via storytelling and ritual. Whether oral or written, history is always an incomplete puzzle, made up of fragments, hints, and selections from the evidence that is available. Historical sources. The ingredients from which historians construct history are their sources. These may range from the types of pollen found in an ancient Near Eastern site, revealing which crops once grew there, to a charter recording a land sale in medieval France, the writings of a historian living in ancient Rome, or the oral testimony of a World War II soldier. Sources are themselves subdivided into those that are primary and those that are secondary. A primary source is something produced or written at the time. The writings of the Latin author Tacitus about 1st century CE Rome, say, while a secondary source is something written after the event itself, making use of primary sources. The distinction between the two may not always be clear, of course. For example, Niccolò Machiavelli's 16th century study of Roman history is a secondary source about Rome, but the obvious influence on his writing of his own view of the world gives us a primary source into life and attitudes in Renaissance Italy. In some eras, particularly the very ancient past, before writing existed, there are no primary sources at all in the conventional sense. Here, archaeology, the study of bones, buildings, and artifacts recovered from past societies, must help out. Varying perspectives. History can be written from many different viewpoints. A 19th century European, writing shortly after the French Revolution, is likely to have very different interests from a Chinese bureaucrat living in the 2nd century BCE, or a 10th century Muslim traveller. Moreover, the interpretation of facts is always open to dispute, and historians often disagree about how one fact is linked with another. Throughout history itself, we see evidence of different ideas about the same events. The perspective of chroniclers such as the French scholar Geoffrey of Villehardouin, who travelled with the Christian forces on the Fourth Crusade, is very different from that of his contemporary on the opposing side, the Arab historian Ibn al-Athir. Inevitably, we are all prone to adjusting history according to our own prejudices and beliefs, but for most, at its simplest, history answers a very human desire for order. Names for eras and ages, the classical world, the medieval world, and so on, and for movements and cultures, may not necessarily have been used at the time, but today they serve to break down the past and its interpretation, into convenient and digestible blocks, making history accessible for all.